Hello and welcome to this podcast from Sifted, Temasek and Resaro on how to find practical pathways for AI assurance in an era of rapid adoption. Sifted is the Financial Times-backed publication covering European tech and startups. Temasek is a Singapore-headquartered global investment firm that's backed some of the world's most exciting companies, including the likes of Adyen, Airbnb and Stripe, to name just a few. And with co-headquarters in Singapore and Germany, Resaro is an independent third-party AI assurance provider that assures the performance, safety, and security of mission-critical AI. Today, we're going to be exploring how investors can balance the fact that pretty much every company in the world today is rushing to adopt AI and make the most out of its capabilities, against the need to develop robust frameworks and systems to minimize long-term risks that come from the technology. We're going to be exploring what are the most effective ways to measure and communicate trust in AI systems to various stakeholders, including regulators, investors, and end users and customers. And we'll also think about how existing ways to assure product quality can inform how we validate AI systems and how this incredibly exciting technology poses new questions for mitigating risk. We've got a fantastic panel with wide experience to get into these issues. I'm joined today by Hwee Chia, Deputy CEO at Temasek, Sebastian Hallensleben, Chief Trust Officer at Resaro, Dr. Frauke Goll, Managing Director of the AppliedAI Institute for Europe GmbH, which generates and communicates high-quality knowledge about trustworthy AI, and finally by Dr. Kerim Galal, EVP of Corporate Development across Strategy, AI, M&A, and in-house consulting at Trumpf, a German company that develops specialized technology for the manufacturing industry. So I'm just going to start off by going around the room and getting you guys to give me a little bit of an introduction of what you're seeing in the AI market at the moment, your general thoughts on how the technology is affecting your role and what you're seeing today in the industry. So Hwee, we'll start with you. I mean, as an investor that looks at tech companies, this has obviously been a huge theme that has permeated across every different type of business. How are you seeing AI come across your desk day to day?
Thank you for the session and thanks for hosting this. As an investor that is sector, market, and stage agnostic, AI is definitely something that we have to grapple with very carefully. So let me kind of layer it in different category of investment focus by looking at the end markets. So if you look at AI, we have the obvious, what we internally call AI native. So these are companies, mainly startups at this phase, who go-to-market approach is to use AI. So you have companies in the LLM space, all sort of applications, vertical, using AI. And so we are seeing hundreds of companies coming out every other month, right, in this space. Then we have the enablers, companies that we are very familiar with, companies in data centers, in chip, telecommunication equipment, who are benefiting from the AI boom. And then last category will be the adopters, including the tech giants who are now actively adopting the AI technology to grow into a new business area, but also to defend their current business model. So that's another category. But we now also have to account for companies who are not in the tech industry, but needing to adopt AI in order to stay relevant or to compete with newcomers in their traditional space. So while there's a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of fear and uncertainty. If one is falling behind, it will become a problem. But if one is ahead, then there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. So as an investor, we do not only need to look at the new opportunities, but we also need to look at our existing portfolio. And one of the key activities that we have undertaken since the late part of 2022 is to look at what part of portfolio will be vulnerable to AI, which are the businesses that will be disrupted, and what do we have to do to make sure that they move in the direction so that their value of the business is not going to be impaired. So there's, given the breadth of our portfolio, the work there is actually quite intensive. And then when we look at new investment, what do we look at? While it is easy for us to think about the excitement of AI, we actually have to come up with a risk assessment framework so that we understand what risk we are dealing with, even for the new opportunities that we're looking at. And one of the area that we need to be careful is how companies are using AI. Are they using AI in a responsible way? And how can we make assessment of the company using AI? Will AI be a concern for safety? Will AI usage be a concern about the societal impact, for example? So I must say that it has created a lot more complexity in terms of how we look at investment opportunity now and going forward.
Thanks, Hwee. Yeah, I think that's a great summary of, how much sort of, fierce competition there is, particularly from adopters in terms of trying to stay ahead of their rivals or colleagues in their sectors, and how that can, also, I guess, pour gasoline on the potential for risk as everyone tries to go as quickly as possible. Sebastian, I'll come to you next. Perhaps from you, a summary of what you've seen in terms of the urgency of making sure that assurance is top of mind for companies and making sure that risk is properly considered. Perhaps an example that illustrates what can go wrong when these kinds of considerations aren't properly given importance in an organization.
Yes, it's important to realize that AI has no value in its own right. AI has value if it gets a job done and if it does so safely and effectively and efficiently. And that's really the roots of AI assurance. And there are quite a few examples what can happen if that goes wrong. So recently we had the case that Canada ran a chatbot that was giving information to customers. And that chatbot erroneously was promising a discount in a slightly convoluted case. The airline tried to undo that and to tell customers, well, it was just an error. The chatbot gave you the wrong information. Customer went to court and the customer won because the court said, well, it's not good enough for a company to blame a computer in the same way as it's not good enough for a company to blame some call center employee in pre-AI times. So if you run an AI system, you have to take responsibility and you have to feel comfortable taking that responsibility. And you can only do that if you know that the AI is good enough. We've also had numerous cases in the legal sector where law firms used AI to prepare their submissions in court cases, and because it's a nice time saver. And it turned out that AI was hallucinating references and hallucinating prior cases, and that caused a whole raft of different types of issues. So first of all, of course, a reputational issue for the law firm. Secondly, sanctions imposed by the court if they are flooded with submissions that are simply factually wrong. And also in a broader sense, we can see the potential for miscarriages of justice, and we can see the potential for people losing faith in the legal system. And I'd also like to highlight examples of autonomous driving accidents where AI drew the wrong conclusions, whether something is an object or whether something is a cyclist, and actually causing deaths. So AI assurance is really the core that gives businesses the confidence that they can use AI both from a reputational risk perspective, from an investment risk perspective, from a safety perspective, from a security perspective. And I think that's a certain baseline, and we'll probably touch on the kind of more performance-related aspects a little bit later.
Yeah, well, three quite varied sector-specific risks there, but I think unifying all of them, illustrating that serious financial, reputational, but also, quite serious human harm in the final case can be done when AI risk isn't taken seriously or perhaps applied in the best way it could be. So as you say, we'll come on to more of that later. But Frauke, coming to you. So in your role, you're generating knowledge about trustworthy AI. I suppose that we've come into AI has obviously been around for a long time. I think that's one misconception that people have, that this has just arrived in the past 2 years. But I suppose it's one thing that has changed is just how many people are interacting with the technology. What has that changed for you in terms of being able to kind of, generate the information that people need about trustworthy AI?
Yes, perfect. This is an awesome question and directly perfect, I would say, because it's exactly like this. So everyone has this ChatGPT moment. So we see on the one hand side those that have little or no experience with AI. And of course, they not necessarily need to know everything about how to develop AI, but they need to know what does it mean to have a secure and a stable system. What is it in terms of where does the data come from? How is this AI system be processed, for example? What's about the topic about biases and so on? And of course, how to use it. And this is something very special for me because I think, especially when we look at the broader sense, AI systems needs to be seen as valuable tools that can do a lot. On the other hand side, we have, of course, those that are very well experienced in building AI systems. And of course, they also need to keep track, especially in terms of AI assurance. And this is something also very interesting we work on with AI developers, with research institutions, but also with companies to really see what does trustworthy AI mean also from a technical perspective in terms of explainable AI, but also in robust AI systems and in further development on this side. And then, of course, we have also the governmental side. So talking about regulation, for example, which is also very important, but also all the needs to what does this mean to implement this in a whole ecosystem. So I would say looking at the topic from an educational perspective and a research perspective, we see now that the topic from this nucleus of the development of AI system really broaden up in a very, very huge sense. And therefore, I think it's so important that we also today in this session talk about AI insurance, AI governance, and also the questions laying behind trustworthy AI.
Yeah, well, I think so much of what you said there relates back to some of Sebastian's examples, kind of understanding the mechanics of these models and how you can't necessarily trust all of the outputs of generative AI, using case law in a live court case that you haven't necessarily double checked. That might not have happened if there'd been better assurance and training in that instance. So I think, really good sort of complementary answers there. Kerim, I'll come to you as someone who's, working in-house at a company, making high value manufacturing equipment. Give us a sense of how you've been using AI, over the years at Trumpf, but also how things have changed as people have been able to more easily interact with these systems.
Mhm. Of course, first of all, let me say 2-3 sentences maybe about the company that I'm working at, because it gives a bit background. So Trumpf is a family-owned business, 5 billion in size. We have 3 business areas. We produce machine tools for the sheet metal industry and laser applications for a broader scale of industries. And the third pillar is in the semiconductor world. So we are enabling companies like ASML to develop extreme ultraviolet light so that chips production can produce. And from that, you already see that technology is always at the heart of a company like Trumpf. So we've been engaging with AI for many years intensively. But I agree with Sebastian, what he said earlier, when you see that AI is it's not just a tool, but I would call it maybe an enabler, and an enabler that needs to create value. So we are very sensitive in where we put attention on. Of course, we're applying AI in production and in extension on our own machines, in things like predictive maintenance, remote monitoring, but of course also more and more, and this a bit was relating to Frauke's ChatGPT moment, more also on internal processes. So in the beginning, we just developed it purely as a technology extension of existing products. And now we're more and more also applying it internal to processes, and also letting our people just, I won't say play around with it, but use it in their day-to-day and see what value comes out of it. Referring to assurance, I also lay a big focus on that. My background is in assurance world. I've been there for more than 10 years in the testing inspection world. But as we are a family-owned business, and trust with our clients is a very, very important theme. This is a differentiator also maybe to competitors from other geographies, to have AI in a way that is fair, it's trustworthy, that it doesn't harm anything, is super important for us. So therefore, it is really mission critical. that we put a lot of attention on. And we have governance models internal, and we're really making sure that we are doing our utmost to ensure a high level of AI trustworthiness. Again, we have large installed bases of machines with our clients, and we're remotely controlling their machines. So if anything is tempered there, we are basically, this trust will be immediately gone. We have very intensive R&D departments. That's clear. Long-standing relations, also always at the client side, or in by involving our clients in developing these new machine tools or extensions. Just imagine the extreme ultraviolet drive laser that we developed together with ASML took 10 years in the development, or even more than 10 years. Very closely collaboration. A lot of course, you do the usual idea and research phase, then you move into POCs, and then you move into minimum viable products and scale it. So the typical procedures there. And always, again, testing, a lot of testing goes into it. And this is kind of how we ensure it. And on top of that, we have an AI governance team. We are currently creating an hub and spoke model within Trumpf, the usual procedure as many companies do. And the AI governance part lies with our hub, where we have different experts grouped together that are then closely linked to the development team. So as soon as developments are going on, very early stage on, the government's people are also being involved. So that it's not at the end of the product development that somebody comes in and so let me check what you have developed, that we continuously do that on the way.
Yeah, so it's not just to sort of make sure it's safe at first. It's a very much an ongoing process with all these different teams. So Hwee, coming back to you, as you kind of look at this market, are there sort of sectors or company verticals where you think that perhaps the stakes are higher in terms of AI assurance? I think when we look at sort of, big regulations like the EU AI Act, things like recruitment were some of like the higher risk areas, because obviously there's, risk of bias and people being discriminated against in hiring processes, which potentially has a big impact for companies, but also society at large, I suppose. But what are you seeing in terms of where you think AI assurance is really high stakes?
I think what will come to mind very quickly is safety and life, right? Anything that will affect human being in terms of safety and life, it has to be right at the top of risk management. And then therefore, the attention for this safe use of AI has to be the focus. And the more autonomous AI being applied to will also require a lot of attention. Now, of course, one can say that if the chatbot recommends something to buy and it was a wrong recommendation compared to AI doing diagnostic and come up with a wrong conclusion, you could have very different perception of the impact on the patient or on the consumer. So the impact assessment should be the key part of businesses determining what type of focus and emphasis and resource that one needs to apply to make sure that your product is safe. I want to come back to a few points that was made by my fellow panel members here. One is the word trust and reputation came out a number of times. And to Temasek, this is the most important risk parameters that we use in running our business. Our reputation is number one, and there's no compromise in that. And the reason is, if you lose your reputation because you lose the trust of your stakeholder, then you have no rights to operate. So then the rest of the tools, the system, the processes, the governance that you put together is to protect that reputation, to protect that trust. And to us, responsible use of AI is one of the element that we have to pay attention on. And to us, it is the same as things like cybersecurity and also sustainability. So we put them all in the same category of importance because it will have direct impact on our reputation and the trust from our stakeholders. And one of the lessons that we learn over time in managing this business risk that has got impact on reputation and trust is forcing ourselves to think, how do we have safety? In this example will be AI safety or AI assurance, be part of the design right from the start. if you do it as an afterthought, it will be likely that you will not get it right because there will be so much hole that you need to patch. And when you already have product out there, it's very hard to remedy. And most businesses will live with that risk rather than go out and have product recalls, right? So I think the whole challenge of businesses is not to rush into product launch, but to be sure that your product is safe. But in order to not waste time, is to make sure that your whole product design process have all those elements built in right from the start. And that is a very good comparison with cybersecurity. We face a lot of cybersecurity threat today because the system that we are using today was not designed for cyber protection. And therefore, we're doing a lot of patchwork today to make sure that it's safe, which is very clunky. So I would say that today with AI, we have the opportunity to do it right from the start. And we should make all efforts to do so. Of course, you have companies or founders who are much more thoughtful, and those are the companies and founders that we tend to spend more time with. For those who have not actually thought about such matter, we tend not to spend time with them because it will not lead to any investment from us anyways. But it is also exactly how we view the threat of AI if it's not done properly, that back as early as 2019, when we have our internal efforts in looking at AI, of course, it's the pre-LLM days, that we always believe that there will be a need in the market for AI assurance. And we kept looking and kept thinking about when would the market be ready to have professional services that will take care of this need. And what we have done during that stage was actually a precursor to the establishment of Resaro. It was a need that we have foresaw long ago.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Temasek is, a founding investor of Resaro, and you've obviously taken this matter really seriously by helping to establish that company. When I'll come to you, Sebastian, at Resaro now, one thing that Hwee mentioned, that the highest stakes obviously is when human life is involved. And I wanted to mention a really fantastic article that Ollie Saltzman, Europe CEO for Resaro, wrote for Sifted, which I'd encourage everyone to go and read. But it makes the point that in defense tech, so this is the theme that has only gained more relevance in the last few months with everything that's going on in the world. And we're seeing that the battlefield today and in the future will be more and more sort of exposed to automated systems. Tell us a bit about how you see this really growing area of AI adoption and what kind of risks that poses and how we can think about assuring our systems are, as trustworthy as possible in those really high stakes environments.
Let me give you one or two concrete examples, and these are actually real examples from Resaro's business. So one is actually a non-physical, non-force example. So in today's world, if you want to make good decisions in a conflict, you rely on excellent intelligence. And that intelligence may come from closed sources, but a lot of the intelligence today also comes from open sources, from, for example, video clips purported to be from the front lines of a conflict. And you obviously try as a military agency to use that open source intelligence and try and derive information from it. However, you don't really want to use any intelligence as input that is fake. So people post lots and lots of deep fakes on social media. And if you base your intelligence assessment and your military decisions on deep fakes, you're obviously in danger of making bad decisions. And so one of the projects that we've been working for the Singaporean government has been to test how good AI-based detection of deepfakes is. There are a number of commercial deepfake detectors on the market that claim to detect deepfakes and to be able to filter out deepfakes before they go into intelligence assessments. But it's not clear how good they are. And we've created the benchmarks, we've created synthetic test data, augmented test data to test and benchmark and compare different deepfake detectors. And so that's an example of where, yes, AI usage is very, very beneficial, but at the same time, you need to have a clear eye on how good those tools are. Another example could be the use of drones, and just zooming in on the moment a drone returns to base. It's supposed to land. It's supposed to land in a certain spot. You don't want it to land on top of people. You don't want it to land in ways that might damage the drone or that might cause harm. And so we need ways of testing that. And we also need ways of defining, well, what is a good drone landing and what is not, beyond, well, it didn't slice anyone's head off and it didn't crash. So these are use cases where we actually see a massive need to go beyond safety. So not just to say, well, what is the minimum requirement, but also to answer the question, what is actually good enough, or what is good and what is not so good. And I just like to build there on Song-Hwee's point that companies are reluctant to rush into the market with products that aren't known to be safe. And similarly, we see companies hesitating to rush into the market with products that they're not sure if they're good enough. And the key challenge here is that on the safety side, we do have a lot of help from regulators and from governance frameworks to tell us, well, what counts as safe and what counts as responsible. And we've got standards emerging. I'm myself leading the committee that creates the European standards to underpin the AI Act. But if we go to the other side, well, what does good enough mean? We are lacking the metrics so far. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later. That's one of the things that we look at in Resaro at the moment to create ways of answering the question, what is good enough?
No, it's a great point that it's not just about how you test, but it's about the sort of, the benchmarks and the standards against which you're making those judgments about a system. And obviously we're dealing with such a different type of technology when things are automated that we do need new ways of doing that. Frauke, I wanted to come to you, obviously someone who's working on the sort of research side of this. Can you share any examples where the kinds of academic research that it's done both by companies like Resaro, but also, in public institutions, how that can translate into practices that can be scalable in industry? Like, how have you seen the sort of the movement from this research and these kind of metrics or benchmarks, and how that can then translate into something that a company can use?
Yeah, there are use cases from the industry sector. So, of course, we heard already also about the automotive industry or the banks, for example, commercial and professional services also you can see here. And what is always very important from my side is then also when it comes to this transfer between research and real world business is that we also draw attention to this knowledge transfer process, but also to see if we try to get those frameworks from the research side into real business solutions, then a lot of things only may show up if we really try it in the real world. So this is really essential when we think of how to come from research to real life business and make a real difference, but also see in terms of safety and security, but also in terms of explainability where the topics are. And this is, in my sense, really absolutely essential if we look at those sides.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, I mean, explainability is one thing that has been really top of mind for a lot of companies, isn't it? Because a lot of the way these AI systems are designed is kind of as a black box where not even the person who has built it can actually explain the process of how it's come to an output, which obviously creates big issues in terms of accountability and how you can diagnose how a problem might have gone wrong.
Actually, just to jump in there, it's worse. It's the black box is even worse. Let me draw an analogy. So imagine you're buying a car and the car manufacturer tells you, yeah, this is a great car. This is an awesome car. It conforms to all the regulations. We've got good processes, good production processes. It's a trustworthy car. Just buy it. And you say, well, and what else can you tell me? No, it's really safe. It's a great car. It's really good for you. And next year's car will be even greater. That's not how we buy cars. We buy cars by looking at things like the top speed. We look at noise levels. We look maybe at the stopping distance. We look at crash test results. We look at reliability statistics. So we've got all these metrics that tell us what is a good car. And we then compare that to what we want to use the car for. Do we want to use it for leisure or for going to work? Or do we want to use the car as a taxi? Or do we want to use the car as part of some delivery service fleet, which might have slightly different priorities and requirements? But we have all these metrics about the performance of the car. And we would never expect to be sold a black box just on the word of the manufacturer saying, yeah, this is a great car and it's safe and it conforms to regulation. But in AI, that's exactly where we are right now.
It's a great point, and I guess that's why it's so important to come up with these benchmarks and systems for how you assess a system. But yeah, Frauke, I was just going to ask, like, could you sort of maybe zero in on an example like banking, for instance, where, you know, they've translated research into real world practices as a business?
So of course we know that AI has been used there for a longer time. For example, in fraud detection systems that using AI in this sector, but also of course in terms of questions like credit scoring and loan approval, that is also used. But what we see now today, when we look at the research side from explainable AI, is used, for example, in credit risk models. And this is, of course, something where, from a safety and security perspective, we really have to also have a closer look on how this really works, because not only in terms of helping to build trust on the decisions that are made by AI-driven decisions, but also in terms of the algorithmic biases that we have when we cannot look into the black box. So model validation is really essential to take internal risks management processes, and therefore it's very important to look at those topics.
No, it's a great example of how, you know, really sort of potentially life-changing decisions about your ability to get a loan or not really are important to make sure that AI won't be going rogue in those examples. So Kerim, coming to you, we've talked about, you know, how are the best ways that companies can approach this issue of not just testing systems, but coming up with the metrics and the standards by which you set those tests. Where do you see AI adoption going at Trumpf in the coming years? You mentioned that, you know, internal processes are changing, but do you think this will be kind of revolutionizing the way you design machinery? Like, where do you see it being most exciting, and what questions do those raise additionally in terms of making sure systems are safe?
First of all, let me just use the opportunity to say that I really like the analogy that Hwee drew from cybersecurity to AI. And I have been close to the introduction of the cybersecurity assurance world in my previous role as CEO of Decra Digital. And it was always seen, as you said, like as a patch. Nobody liked it. Nobody really understood it. It was just, okay, yeah, we need to make it somehow cyber secure. And also the other side, that the individuals didn't care. The buyer of a car didn't care if this car is cyber secure, whatever. And I'm not willing to pay more for it. Now with AI, this is changing, because it's not anymore just about getting information out of a car or blocking some systems. Now it's about really influencing systems. It's really about taking over control. And again, coming back to that issue of safety, harming individuals and harming people. So therefore, the attention on AI assurance is way higher, I would expect, than it has been on cybersecurity. So that's a good thing. And I'm talking that line. To your question, AI will be all over the place. Last week, I heard a nice talk of the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, who basically said, I have one thing on my agenda, which is AI. Because AI will do anything. It will be everywhere. And we are an infrastructure provider for telecommunication. So you could think of, why is that so important for them? And the same is for Trumpf. So we will have it all over the place. And we're already applying it, as I said, in the production and the product development side. But it will go, and people will also ask for it. If we have young hires that come into the company, first questions will be, okay, so what are the tools that we're able to use? Because it's not about Word and Excel anymore and all of these things, and PowerPoint, but it's just about applying ChatGPT. And we have, by the way, our own ChatGPT version in place and in rollout. So everybody will be working with these tools. And so therefore adoption will increase tremendously. And I would even put it this way. If a company is not able to be very core to AI, they will lose competitive edge immediately. And this will be a game of a couple of years only. So therefore, this is something we are taking really seriously.
Yeah, and that's very interesting that you have made your own sort of internal ChatGPT alternative. Tell us a bit about the reasons for that and, you know, what that involves. Like, are you using a open source third-party model that you put your own rails on? Like, how do you go about doing that?
So as I mentioned earlier, we have very, very sensitive customer data and work with also geopolitically very sensitive issues. If you look into the chip industry, we all know the discussions around Taiwan and about Japan and in the US and China. And we work with all these clients and we are very close to them. So therefore, we need to make sure that our data and everything that is possible to be taken out is very, very sensitive. So therefore, we have strong regulations in place of what external or open source tools we're able to use. So therefore, of course, we went the way of using existing tools. But of course, I think you framed it in putting our own rails on top of them. And it took us quite some time. So we were not the ones to put it out immediately last year when every company just said, okay, 65,000 people, please use it and apply it in your day-to-day job. I think a couple of companies did that and they wanted to be super strong and smart and quick, but they're all pulling back now because they're realizing, oh, it's very sensitive to put medical data or whatever data into these systems. So we took a more cautious approach on it, but now we are in the process of rolling it out. Everybody is able to use it. It is our own design. It has, we call it blue GPT because that's our color. So this is the way we were dealing with it. And of course, we had our assurances teams being closely involved together with our data security teams as well.
Hwee, coming back to you, we've touched a lot here on, you know, as Kerim just said, that, you know, a young hire coming in will expect a modern company to be using AI in sort of agile and dynamic ways. And Kerim also said that, you know, you will fall behind if you're not using this in industry at the moment. So how do you as an investor balance encouraging experimentation and, you know, trying to get the best out of this technology with what we've discussed at length here already in terms of the need to make sure systems are safe? Like what's the way that you communicate this balancing act to founders, and how have you seen that be done well in terms of being ambitious while also thinking cautiously from day one?
Maybe I will answer the question in two folds. One is our internal efforts. Like many businesses, younger employees, they really want to adopt technology, test it out. But frankly speaking, a lot of tools that are available today are not enterprise grade, so to speak. So we need to be careful in terms of adoption. Of course, quite quickly, we can create sandbox for people to experiment, play with it, and learn the effectiveness of a tool for whatever use cases. Those are the easy thing. But to roll it out for the entire organization to use is a different proposition. But we start with education. We need our employees to be educated what this technology could do and the risk associated with the use of the technology. So I think the education part is most important. And even during the initial days of experimenting with it, right, teaching people how to prompt, what question to ask, is also a part of the education. So now it's a very much a formal program where employees are expected to go through those training. But then next is, what our use cases should we allow the team to work on? We clearly can see the potential, and a lot of employees want to use the technology to help them improve their work in terms of productivity. But there will be so many projects that one can come up with. Which one should we prioritize? Even if they require very little IT support, right? Because a lot of tools you just can do it on your notebook or even on your phone, which require no IT support. But if we do not have prioritization, then maybe our employees will be working on a lot of things that actually does not move the needle, and that is not a good productive use of time. So certain expectation of prioritization within each function is also something that we worked on. I wouldn't say that we are there completely yet, but it's still work in progress. Productivity initiative a lot easier to address, and the risk profile there will be a lot lower. But if we are using AI tools to help us make investment decision, that is definitely a different consideration. What we are trying to do at this stage in terms of thinking about how the tools can help us make investment decision, there are programs ongoing for us to test. For example, we have all investment cases, right? You can actually use the machine, feed in all the data and see whether the machine will give you same or different answer and why, right? So those things are interesting projects that we are working on. So if you think about the investments or activities where we look at companies, like I said earlier, companies that are thoughtful and have the processes put in place, maybe not perfect, right? Because we are still in the early stage to have a way for them to assure that their products or services that they put out is going to be safe, and that customers, whether consumer or enterprises, interests are protected. So in this early stage, it's more of asking the question and seeing the reaction from the founder and the management team. Like I said, right, nobody have all the answers. But if there's a mindset in making sure that these are the things that we need to address, and there is a governance structure, there is a team of people constantly looking at this issue, would give us the comfort, even though they may not have everything checked. But it is the process and system and governance system, and more importantly, the transparency, the culture of the company, whether or not they have the right culture and right level of transparency in dealing with the issues that we talk about.
Yeah, so it's as much of a cultural thing as it is sort of practical in terms of the day-to-day. Sebastian, I wanted to come to you. How have you seen that, traditional product certification, you mentioned automotive earlier, but, this is a big sort of, industry pillar in industries like medical. How can they inform how we validate AI systems, and how will the unique capabilities presented by AI mean that we need different systems to validate them?
I strongly agree that there is a lot in the testing and the certification of non-AI products and solutions that we can learn from. There's sometimes this misconception that just because something contains AI, everything changes. But ultimately, if you're a factory worker working next to a robot, you want that robot to help you and do some of the heavy lifting, quite literally. You also want the robot not to hurt you, but you don't really care whether that robot is controlled in the traditional software way or whether it's controlled by AI. And the safety regime and also the performance demands on a robot do not change or do not go out of the window just because it contains AI. And this is sometimes quite hard to accept for let's say, for AI evangelists who think that, oh, well, traditional notions of safety or of having to prove safety or having to prove performance no longer apply. So step one really in response to your question is to realize that what we used to conclude is important is still important and still needs to be tested. And the innovation gap that we have for testing and for proving certain aspects of AI, because as you said earlier, even technologically, it's a black box in some respects, yeah, that's innovation that is necessary, and where we have to become much better to do it. Secondly, again, something that we can transfer from the old world, so to speak, is a good understanding of what is the right AI, what is the right AI solution. So if you put yourself into the shoes of a procurement department, they are very used to putting out RFQs or a request for quotation to invite proposals. Then those proposals come back, you compare them, and eventually you decide which one to buy. This is exactly the same process for AI, except that companies don't yet understand what to put into the RFQs. And in many cases, they don't have the capability to compare the proposals that come back. To me, and also to the team at Resaro, a core question is, well, what is actually good? What is quality? How do we describe what we're after? And Songwei touched on it, and Kerim touched on it as well. This is not a question that can be answered by any single person inside an organization. This is a question where at least, I would say, 3 different types of people have an opinion on. Firstly, you have, let's say, the business people who want to see certain functionality, they want to see certain value created, they might worry about reputation, they want to see return on invest and so on. Secondly, you've got, let's say, the governance people in a company who want to make sure that the product is compliant, that it maybe conforms to certain standards that the company has given itself or decided to adhere to. They've got a certain view on what a good product is. And thirdly, you've got the technical people, the engineers, who have a much more raw, technical, hands-on view on what constitutes a good product. And the challenge is that we need to create a shared way of these 3, the business people, the governance people, and the technical people, to describe what is good enough. And that's actually something that we spent quite a bit of attention on in Resaro, to build something we call a quality index that is understandable to these 3 groups, and that can be mapped to technical testing, and that can also be mapped to whatever goes into an RFQ, and that can also guide the evaluation of proposals that come back. We need to understand, and that's maybe also part of the transition from a focus on safety and compliance over to also consider performance. We need to understand that this is not a binary choice. It's not like you're compliant or not compliant, but you've got certain dimensions of quality, and you need to decide to what extent different dimensions of quality are important to you. So I mentioned the example of a customer service chatbot at the beginning where things can go wrong if the chatbot promises too much. So that could be a quality indicator. Another indicator could be the tendency of the chatbot to become toxic. Another indicator could be the tendency of the chatbot or the ability of the chatbot to be configured very easily by the operator. And all those quality dimensions need to be balanced. You can't have top quality everywhere. You need to make a decision between the business, the governance, and the technical people on what is important to you and what does good look like.
So I would like to add up to the topics that Sebastian just mentioned. Maybe one step back. I used to work in the testing inspection world, and now I'm working in the high-tech production world. So I know a bit both worlds. And then I'm also inclined to listen to Sebastian, and I know that Resaro's approach is going in that direction, which is not overdoing everything with regulation and taking out the speed of innovation, because that's something that we tend to love to do in Germany or even Europe in parts. So coming from these traditional assurance companies that are rather to making everything 100% sound and safe and sure, and this will be very difficult in the subject of AI. So it needs to have some pragmatic approach, which is trustworthy and sure enough, and accompanying very early on. And so therefore, I just wanted to put that out a bit, and that we don't throw the speed of innovation under the bus just for the sake of having it 100% sure. So therefore, the approach that Resaro is taking is the right one in my eyes. Accompanying early stage, doing that on a good eye level with the development, and not just complying to regulation for the sake of having it compliant. It needs to work at the end, and it needs to be creating value at the customer side or at the individual side. So we need to make sure. And we always had that joke within in DECRA in previous times in the car world. If you make it 100% sure, you don't drive, right? So if that's not what we want to achieve with AI. We don't apply AI to make it super safe. That's not the direction we want to take it. Surely.
No, understood. And Frauke, I'll come to you now, because there is often this sort of perceived tension between innovation and regulation. So how can we frame assurance as not just a compliance burden that's going to slow innovation down? Europe has this horrible reputation for regulating rather than innovating. So how can we make sure that we can actually see assurance as an enabler of really responsible innovation?
If it comes to innovation and regulation, I think this is very important, is that we have an easier implementation of the AI Act if we look now at the European side. So I think no one of us or all those that were into it know about this GDPR maybe trauma we may have at this part, and we don't want to have this again, I would say. So therefore, it's really important that we find a very good balance between what is really necessary, what is good enough, what we really need to regulate, but where we also want to foster innovation and keep up with innovations. Additionally, I would say it's also about harmonization, and it's about preparing for testing opportunities so that you really can also in an early stage, in a good environment, also can come up with ideas you want to test and want to see how this works and what is good enough, what is necessary. Sometimes you need testing and experimentation fields where you can do so. So this is also very important, that governments also give this room and also foster regulatory learning on this side to see and to strengthen innovation at this sense. And therefore, I also would say it's a huge learning process that we really have to take action now in the different fields of politics, of organizations, industry, but also from the research side and also from the society side.
So we are coming to the end of our time today, but I just wanted to end with a final question to you, Hwee, because we've spoken a lot about how the sort of huge explosion in AI usage has created a lot of questions for people considering how to make sure AI is safe. But this is by no means stopping. And one thing that has really caught the attention of investors recently has been agentic AI systems that have more control to carry out tasks without human direction. So it's sort of the next layer of automation where AI models will actually be doing stuff rather than just giving outputs to our inputs, but acting more autonomously. So tell us how you see that going and what kinds of questions that will create for people building companies in as responsible a way as possible.
If we were to project ahead with the deployment of agentic AI, where human beings are not in the loop, you can imagine the risk and disaster if there's no AI assurance framework where companies don't focus on it, which will be a pity because agentic AI has got huge potential. You cannot then work on cybersecurity issues and your AI assurance issue for safety and fairness and all that after the fact. It must be done as part of your system, product, and services design. Otherwise, agentic AI future cannot happen because it will have a lot of implication where we cannot control. So if that's the world that we are heading, why wait? We should start now.
Yeah. No, it's an exciting point to end on, but as you say, it will create a whole host of questions for people trying to assure that these systems are safe and reliable, and that we can have assurance in them that they will do what we want them to do and not get out of control. But we've come to the end of our time today, so I just want to say a big thank you to all our panelists: Hwee Chia from Temasek, Sebastian Hallensleben, Chief Trust Officer at Resaro, Dr. Frauke Goll from the AppliedAI Institute for AI at Europe GmbH, and Dr. Kerim Galal from Trumpf. We've had a really interesting discussion that has taken into account how we've got here with AI, what are the current considerations for making sure systems are safe, and also where that might be going next. So big thank you to everyone for listening, and please stay tuned to what's coming next from our hosts Temasek and Resaro on this theme. Thank you very much to all of you.